What's up, everybody? On today's show, we are talking with Ben Beecken from Locked On Wolves. He gives his thoughts on Kyle Anderson, who spent the last 2 seasons in Minnesota. How will slow-mo help the Warriors this season? Plus, we've wanted size in the Bay for years. Minnesota has too much of it, so would they ever make a deal? And what would it take to make that deal? On today's Locked On Dubs.
You are Locked On Warriors, your daily Golden State Warriors podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is the good word, everyone? Thank you for making Locked On Warriors your first listen of every day. The best way to find this show is literally anywhere. YouTube. Come October 5th, after the Los Angeles Clippers preseason game, we are going live. That's after every single game this season as soon as the horn sounds. So subscribe to the YouTube page and make sure you definitely hit that bell so you know when we're live. Also free and available on the go wherever you get your audio podcasts. Spotify, Google, Apple. We are there for you. Make sure you are subscribed that way as well. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. That is ending soon. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. My name's Charlie Walter, formerly of 95.7 The Game. I was a talk show host there, Sports Talk Radio. That is the flagship for the Golden State Warriors. Also was a sports anchor and reporter for CBS News Bay Area, which is KPIX. I covered the Warriors championship run in 21-22. A little rundown of today's show. We're talking with Ben Beecken of Locked On Wolves. It's our Western Conference preview. We're calling it the Wild Wild West Tour. And I thought it was a good time to link up with the Wolves because Minnesota has something that Golden State could use. That is a 6'9" player named Naz Reid coming off their bench. They also have 2 7-footers in their starting lineup. So if they ever decided that size maybe wasn't the way to go, an overabundance of size, and they wanted another player, could they look at the Warriors and swap needs there? We discussed that. We can't bury the lead as much as I like talking about hypothetical Karl-Anthony Towns trades and could Naz Reid be a fit for the Golden State Warriors. You got to mention the player that comes from Minnesota that's now expected to have a pretty sizable role for the Golden State Warriors this year. That's Kyle Anderson. They call him Slow-Mo. What was the general consensus around Slow-Mo's game and how he helped you win in Minnesota?
He was in Minnesota for 2 years. He spent 4 years in San Antonio, 4 in Memphis. And when he came to Minnesota in the summer of 22, Chris Finch was like glowing, preseason talking about Kyle Anderson, about how he's a Swiss Army knife and he can, do whatever the coach wants him to do on both ends of the floor. He's a coach's dream, et cetera, et cetera. He probably called him a Swiss Army knife in every interview before the season last year. And in the 22-23 season, he was awesome. It was one of the best offensive years of his career. He actually shot 41% from 3, which he had never, I think, once had shot greater than 33% from 3 in his career. It was only 1.5 attempts per game, and it was strictly from the corners, but it was one of the best shooting seasons of his career, and he was really impactful. He stepped in and started when Karl-Anthony Towns was out for 50-plus games with a calf injury. Last season was the opposite. He really struggled. Actually had a career worst year from outside the arc. Only shot 22% from three-point range, to the point where teams were just leaving him completely wide open, and then he would still pump fake out of an open three-point shot and dribble into a much tougher kind of push shot from 10 feet. It became a frustration for Timberwolves fans. But what he can do defensively is undeniable. He can guard multiple positions. He's switchable. He's a very smart player. And what they would do is if teams would play zone on the other end of the floor, if teams would play zone against the Wolves, Slow-Mo was the zone beater. So he would go to the nail, he'd go to the center of the floor, and he would distribute. And he would play point forward with that second unit when they didn't have a backup point guard. So he's a super valuable player in that he can do basically anything. He's just not going to be a knockdown three-point shooter, and you have to factor that in when he's on the floor, that he could really grind your offense to a halt if he's in the wrong spot on the floor. But defensively, he's a dream. Awesome to have. You're not going to put him on like a super dynamic point of attack, offensive player, a playmaker, or somebody, who's got the ball in his hands a lot on the perimeter. But he can switch onto 1s and 2s and do a good job, and he can guard pretty much any 3s and 4s. So he's a really, really great role player to have on a contending team. I think it just got a little dicey with some of the Wolves' spacing issues offensively. Like when he was on the floor with Rudy Gobert, it was a bit clunky. But when they weren't on the floor together, things worked much more smoothly. So as long as you could factor that in a team with Steph Curry, like it's not like Draymond's out here lighting it on fire from outside the arc. So I think Steve Kerr and the Warriors can figure it out. But he's an awesome role player to have overall, and was certainly beloved in his first season in Minnesota, even if things got a bit rocky toward the end of the year last year.
Yeah, based off everything that you said, what I've heard, what I've seen, he's not going to be playing on the floor at the same time as Draymond Green.
Right.
I feel like he's going to be Draymond Green's backup to kind of play that same role where it's like captain of the defense, kind of the point guard of the defense, cerebral on offense. He's no Draymond Green, but I just don't see any way that they brought him in to play minutes, like singular minutes at the same time as Draymond Green this year. If his offense is indeed as much of a stop plug as you kind of just mentioned.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I would say his style, what he brings to the floor is like a very light version of Draymond. He was never as good of a defender as Draymond, obviously, but that type of player, a fantastic team defender, a capable individual defender against really 1 through 5 in a pinch, and an effective offensive player at moving the basketball, making the right play. And you just gotta, be smart with your lineups around him. And I think sometimes that was a failing of Chris Finch, and it was more on Chris Finch than it was on Kyle Anderson last year, frankly. But he's a really nice player to have.
I like that, man. You got to be very cognizant of the lineups that you put around him. And there's no doubt Steve Kerr's got the most toys he's had to play with in a long time. So put Hield and Curry around him and not Draymond Green. Karl Anthony Towns. It is a name that's been associated with the Warriors for a minute now.
Yeah.
I think it's not deniable that Golden State's front office is at least intrigued by Cat's ability to stretch the floor as a 6'9", forward/center. With that being said, and I say 6'9", how about 7 feet? He's much bigger than 6'9". That's a skill set Golden State would love to have. With that being said, is there anyone on Golden State's roster that you look at and say, all right, maybe a trade down the road could make sense? Because right now it seems like Minnesota, they're kind of set in stone with what they have, but they do have an abundance of bigs. Like, is there anything that maybe they are missing that you look at Golden State and say, hey, that could be a potential trade partnership?
Yeah, I haven't done the trade machine exercise recently with the Warriors, so it's tough to I'm going to maybe name a couple names and it may or may not work or make sense. But you're right. First of all, the Timberwolves are not looking to make a move anytime, a significant move. They're kind of stuck being over the second apron. They can't add pieces. They're not eager to trade Karl Anthony Towns, but the Supermax does kick in this year. And so they're going to be paying, as of right now, the luxury tax bill is projected to be over $100 million if it stays the same at the end of the season, which would be, Golden State paid more than that, I think, this year. And there's one other team that was up there. So that's not tenable long-term, but with the Wolves going to the conference finals last year, they're not in a hurry to break things up. So like you said, I don't think they're trading Cat during the season. If things go completely awry, like if at Christmas they're, below 500 or something crazy, it's possible. And Cat would be the most likely guy to be traded. They're not trading Anthony Edwards, obviously. I don't think they're going to trade Jaden McDaniels. They value him. He just signed an extension. Rudy Gobert is going to be harder to trade. He's extension eligible. He doesn't have as much value as Cat, and at the moment he makes more money and is also going to be doing extension after next season. So Cat is the most logical. Cat or Naz Reid would be the other one. But Cat with the bigger salary is the piece that would make the biggest impact on the Wolves' books if they were able to move him. So that being said, I don't know. I went through this actually about a year ago with the Warriors, and kind of there was a rumor last summer at one point about Cat and the Warriors. It's tough. The Timberwolves always need shooting. Everybody needs shooting, but the Wolves need more spacing around Ant as he attacks the basket. So, obviously you're not building a Cat trade around like a Buddy Hield, but like a name like that is somebody the Wolves have always been rumored to be interested in. There's obviously bigger names that may or may not be the centerpiece of a deal. There's, guys like Jonathan Kuminga, if you're looking for a bigger body in return. Brandon Podziemski, of course, had a big rookie season, so I don't know how on the table he would be, but guys like that could be. Kuminga isn't maybe like a plug and play role guy at this moment, and that's maybe part of Golden State's problem. But maybe he could be, and maybe there's some upside there. So I don't know. It would be tough for me to cobble something together right now that makes sense from the Warriors. But I think if Cat ends up getting moved, there's probably multiple teams involved, and maybe there's other assets coming the Wolves' way. They also very famously don't have very many picks on their ledger because of the Rudy Gobert trade, and then they traded another future pick this year to trade up to number 8 to get Rob Dillingham. So whether it's picks in return, some combination of young talent, but matching the Cat salary is going to be what the biggest trick is. And that's why I think there'd probably have to be a third team involved.
Here's the thing. Minnesota does have a lack of draft picks right now after trading for Rudy Gobert. Golden State has draft picks to give them. The question is, would they do it? Naz Reid, he's a name that's enticing. Does it make sense from the Wolves side? We discuss next. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook, and we got a little something different for you. This is now through September 22nd. All FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's number one sportsbook. A lot of NFL games, college football. We got baseball playoffs coming up. FanDuel, it is the place to be. I'm not giving you any locks right now, but I'm already looking at that opening line between the Clippers and the Golden State Warriors. In fact, I haven't checked it out whatsoever. But when I do, I'll be doing it at FanDuel.com, America's number one sportsbook. That's why I immediately point to the Wolves as a potential trade partner. And it's not everything has to be a fleecing, right? Sometimes it can just be a good trade for both sides. And that's how I look at Minnesota. Like, they have so many bigs with Gobert and Cat and Reed. Like, at some point, what are you guys missing? Does Golden State have it? Can we get Naz Reid? Like, you don't want to give up Cat, whatever. Can we get Naz Reid? Like, Minnesota has something that Golden State is missing, because Naz Reid's good enough to be a starter. Karl Anthony Towns is good enough to be a starter. Sure, you can have, one of the best sixth men in all of basketball coming off your bench and get to a Western Conference Finals that way. But if you want to win it, like, what are you missing? Does Golden State have it? Can we make a deal? That's kind of the way I look at it. But it does seem like when you have a young team that goes to the Western Conference Finals the season before, if it's not broken, maybe don't fix it. See if you can just tinker it here and there and get it to work. That's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, and 7 of the top 8 rotation players from last year are returning. In fact, the only one that's not is Kyle Anderson, who's now in the Golden State Warriors. He's the only rotation piece from last year's team, at least in the playoff rotation, that isn't back with the team. So you're returning a lot of the same guys. However, there isn't in addition to always needing more shooting, which is like they're replacing Kyle Anderson likely with Joe Ingles, who's obviously a better perimeter shooter. So in theory, they should be an even better 3-point shooting team this year. I think backup point guard / whatever position is going to initiate the offense off the bench is the big question mark. And the succession plan for Mike Conley, who's about to turn 37 and just signed a 2-year extension, but started to break down in the playoffs last year. So what's the plan past Mike Conley? They traded up to number 8 to draft Rob Dillingham out of Kentucky. And he's 19, he's 165 pounds. Like, there's a lot of question marks there. Can he defend at the NBA level? But they're banking on him to kind of be the straw that stirs the drink with the bench unit. And that's what they need, is somebody off the bench you can create. Yes, Naz Reid won 6th man of the year last year, but you're not really running your offense through him. He's just kind of, he does a little bit of everything, but he's not your traditional, he's not a traditional back to the basket big. He's also not really handling the ball a lot on the perimeter. He can do those things, but he's more of a spot up 3-point shooter, pump fake, get to the rim, dunk on somebody, play in transition, get a highlight reel block, does all those things. They do need somebody to kind of initiate off the bench, and they're hoping Rob Dillingham could be that guy. It's a relatively big gamble for a team that went to the conference finals and has really high expectations for this year. But that's kind of the biggest hole for the Timberwolves right now, is who's Mike Conley's backup? What happens if Mike Conley, God forbid, gets hurt for an extended period of time? Are you really starting Rob Dillingham with a team that is supposed to be a championship contender? I think that's the biggest question mark as of right now.
Yeah, and then if you wanted to make a trade partner and say, all right, Naz Reid for like a Brandon Podziemski, something like that, that would have to be on Warriors, the front office and the coaching staff to think that is a good trade at that stage in time. And I have no idea whether that would be or not, but it would definitely, fill each team's needs somewhat, because the Warriors do have Melton and Hield and some guys that can be your temporary stop plugs at the shooting guard position. You can add in a big and Naz Reid, who I'm high on, man. I've liked Naz Reid since, he looked like he was about 40 playing his freshman season at LSU. I've always thought he had a really nice game. Wolves have a good team this upcoming season, expected to be right up there in the Western Conference. What have they done this offseason in terms of just improving their chances to get back to the spot they were at last year and win an extra game or two.
Yeah, I mean, the Rob Dillingham acquisition was their big move because they're over the second apron. They couldn't add anybody, so they traded up to number 8 to take Rob Dillingham. They traded a 2030 first-round pick and a future pick swap to get up to number 8 with San Antonio and draft Dillingham. He shot almost 50% on catch-and-shoot threes last season at Kentucky. Should be a plug-and-play offensive player at the NBA level, but he's small, and he'll be a question mark defensively. So he's also potentially the Mike Conley succession plan as well. And then the only real addition they made was Joe Ingles to a vet minimum contract, and he's likely filling that quote unquote Kyle Anderson, the slow-mo role, where it's he's obviously less defensive minded than slow-mo, but the idea is he could play a little point forward, knock down open threes, which is something Kyle Anderson didn't really do, especially not last year. But that was really kind of it. The idea is like, hey, look, we were the best team in the NBA defensively by far, like literally the biggest margin for the best defensive team to the second best. Only it's the second biggest in the last 30 years. It was like the 2015 Spurs, or the only other team that was that much better than the second best defensive team by defensive rating. So they were historically great defense. The offense was very middle of the pack. So can Chris Finch, who's supposed to be an offensive mastermind, coached Jokic briefly in Denver, coached the double bigs with the Pelicans and Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins, can he figure out how to make Gobert and Cat and Ant all work together and be better than a middle of the pack offense? If they can do that, then this immediately becomes one of the best 3 or 4 teams in the league for the entire season, because you're talking about the best defense and one of the best offenses. So that's really kind of the key. Can they squeeze a little bit more efficient offense? Can they make Cat, Rudy, and Ant all work together a little bit more seamlessly? And the only way that they could solve like the acquisition thing, that was a really creative solution to try and get Rob Dillingham, because they weren't signing anybody. They don't have any trade chips that is worth anything to anyone else in terms of like salary matching or anyone that they would be willing to trade. So the only way you can really do it is through the draft. And then they also drafted TJ Shannon out of Illinois, Terrence Shannon Jr. In the first round. And he, for a long time, looked like he had a shot at winning player of the year until he had the legal problems. And they, in some ways, was a draft steal. So they have 2 first-round picks that are going to be on the fringe of their rotation this year. And really, Dillingham's not on the fringe. They're going to count heavily on him. So it's a little bit abnormal to have a team returning 7 of 8 rotation guys for a Western Conference Finals team, but then 2 other rotation guys are going to be rookie first-round picks that they're going to be relying heavily on.
Live events are great, and at this point, with all the technology we have, they can be easy as well. Take the guesswork out of live events with GameTime. Some of the features that you get, the closer you get to your event, the cheaper tickets get. So you can play the procrastination game. No issues there. Also, the lowest price guarantee, or GameTime will credit you 110% of the difference. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the industry. You get panoramic views from your seat in the app before you buy. That is good stuff all the way around. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download GameTime today. What time is it? Game time. The Warriors have added 3 mid-level players to the roster. I just mentioned all 3 of them: DeAnthony Melton, Buddy Hield, and Kyle Anderson. Kyle Anderson has a very different game than the other 2. They call him slow-mo because of the methodical pace he plays the game at. The way that he affects basketball games is through his IQ, through his ball handling abilities for his size, through his cerebral leadership on the defensive side of the ball. And he has made an impact for a while now. Not a massive impact. It's going to turn your team from, a play-in team to a championship contender, but every little bit counts. We saw Anderson consistently get 15, 20 minutes in that Grizzlies-Warriors second-round matchup in the 2022 playoffs. Had the same solid role the last 2 seasons for the Wolves. Don't expect much scoring or shooting. His season high last year was just 17 points. But let's get into a little deep dive of Kyle Anderson from just the perspective of his Wikipedia before we ask Ben Beecken, who watched every single game that Anderson played in last season. So Anderson developed ball handling skills of a point guard in an early age, and then hit a growth spurt and played the forward position and had, better than average ball handling skills for someone his size. That also happened with Anthony Davis. If you remember, he was, a point guard at a young age, hit that growth spurt, whatever. And out of high school, Anderson was lauded as like the guy. There were comparisons to basketball legend Magic Johnson. Had comparisons to Kevin Durant. So this happens with young high school players that are dominant. But Anderson's high school coach was Bob Hurley and said, quote, "I think he's a modern day Magic Johnson. I think that let him play the point guard. He gets everybody shots. You don't have him back defensively balancing the floor. You're wasting him. But you let him do a lot of what the point guard stuff entails. But then also defensively, you don't bother guarding him on the little guy. Put him on maybe a 3-man or even sometimes the 4-man, and he's a step-out player." During his sophomore season at UCLA, CBSSports.com wrote that Anderson was starting to look more and more like Magic Johnson in the 2013-14 season of college basketball, to which Dick Vitale all the way back then said, easy now. Has a mini version of that kind of skill, but you cannot compare him to even a poor man's Magic Johnson. Greg Popovich said, he's not what you call a typical NBA athlete, but he does affect the game in a lot of different ways. Praised for his basketball IQ. He's able to change speeds and fake out his opponents to keep them off balance. And that methodical style he plays with, to which some would say is a nasty way to watch a basketball game. Today's day and age, we all love threes. Not very good at three-pointers. Has had some seasons where he can knock a few down, can definitely hit them from the corner, but he is not what you call a three-point specialist by any definition of the words. But changes speeds, can fake out opponents to keep them off balance, and got that nickname Slow-Mo in 8th grade in AAU, and the name has stuck with. So what you can expect, someone that helps your team win through the details of the game, does the little things right, but as Greg Popovich said, not what you call a typical NBA athlete. I am so excited, as you are, for this season to begin. I mean, when you're hosting a Warriors podcast 5 days a week, you are looking for topics any way you can find them. Doing the best we can with the Wild Wild West tour to bring you guys up to speed with the other teams from the Western Conference, but it's not going to be much longer. October 1st, Warriors start camp in Hawaii. They're going to start giving us press conferences. The insiders are going to have the scoops coming out, and then we get real basketball games on the 5th. That is it on the show today. We're going to continue the Wild Wild West tour until we get some real basketball news. Another thing that I want to talk about on a show moving forward is who has the most approved for the Golden State Warriors this upcoming season. I think the stock answer would be Jonathan Kuminga. I may say Andrew Wiggins. We'll debate that on a future episode, but this is Locked On Warriors, free and available wherever you get your audio podcasts. Appreciate it, and have a great weekend, everyone.